America did not defeat Nazi Germany first with bombs, tanks, or soldiers. America defeated it with lights, with factories that never slept, with food so abundant it was thrown away, with trains so comfortable they felt like luxury hotels. Long before the Third Reich collapsed on the battlefield, it collapsed in the minds of its own soldiers the moment they set foot on American soil. This is the story of how the United States shattered an enemy ideology not through propaganda, but through undeniable reality, and proved to the world that freedom, industry, and democracy were the most powerful weapons ever built. On June 4, 1943, at 10 o'clock at night, the Texas plains were glowing like a constellation fallen to earth. From horizon to horizon, electric lights burned in every farmhouse, every street corner, every store window. Through the glass of a passenger train rolling into Mexia, Texas, a German soldier stared in disbelief. His name was Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt, and as he secretly opened his diary, his hand trembled. What he was about to write could have destroyed his life if discovered by his own officers. "The Americans must be lying to us," he wrote. "No nation could live like this while fighting a war on two fronts." For 3 years, Nazi propaganda had described America as weak, decadent, collapsing under its own excess. But what Burkhardt saw that night contradicted everything he had been taught to believe. Germany had lived under blackouts since 1940. Even before the war, most rural German farms had no electricity at all. Yet here, in what Nazi leaders called a dying democracy, electricity flowed freely, endlessly, effortlessly. That night, 1,850 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped off the train. These were not broken men. They were hardened survivors of desert warfare, soldiers who had driven the British across North Africa and earned the respect of their enemies. And yet, they did not arrive in cattle cars or freight wagons, but in cushioned Pullman coaches with sleeping berths and dining service. The entire town of Mexia had gathered to watch them arrive. None of the prisoners understood it yet, but this moment marked the beginning of one of the most complete psychological defeats in modern history. Nazi ideology was about to be dismantled piece by piece, not by force, but by exposure to American industrial power on a scale so vast it felt unreal. Their collapse had begun weeks earlier in Tunisia, when more than 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in what became one of the greatest capitulations in history. These were elite units, experienced fighters, men who believed themselves superior in discipline, technology, and will. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, a decorated veteran whose diary would later become one of the most important records of the German prisoner experience. From the very first days of American captivity, their assumptions began to crack. Processing camps ran with astonishing efficiency. Thousands of prisoners were registered daily, medically examined, vaccinated, and informed of their rights under the Geneva Convention in fluent German. There was no chaos, no brutality, no confusion. And then there was the food: white bread, real coffee, meat served twice a day. Not as a show, not as propaganda. This, American guards calmly explained, was standard military rations. When the prisoners boarded Liberty ships bound for the United States, they encountered something that defied belief. These massive vessels, carrying thousands of men across the Atlantic, were themselves symbols of American power. Over 2,700 Liberty ships would be built during the war, many in just days. One of them had been completed in a little over 4 days, a fact that would have sounded like fantasy if the Germans had heard it earlier. On board, American sailors openly discarded half-eaten steaks, loaves of bread, and milk that had gone warm. They did not do this to mock the prisoners. They did it because abundance made waste meaningless. To men raised on rationing and scarcity, this was more disturbing than cruelty. As the ships approached the American coast in August 1943, the last illusions began to fall. German officers noticed radar equipment rotating openly atop cargo ships, technology they believed only Germany possessed. One Prussian aristocrat later wrote that it was at that moment he realized the war was already lost. Norfolk Naval Base delivered the final blow. Miles of docks stretched across the horizon. Cranes moved with electric power, loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this one port handled more cargo than the entire port of Hamburg could manage in a week. Parking lots were filled with civilian cars owned by dock workers, a sight that stunned men who knew that even German officers rarely owned vehicles. Then came the trains that carried them inland. Not boxcars, not military wagons, but full passenger coaches with padded seats, dining cars, observation windows, and even air conditioning. One American sergeant apologized that the cooling system was not working properly. Air conditioning in August during wartime. As the trains rolled through Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, the prisoners pressed their faces against the windows. Every town was illuminated. Every factory ran through the night. Parking lots overflowed with cars. Factories stretched for miles, consuming more electricity than entire German cities. They passed aluminum plants, synthetic rubber complexes, and finally Detroit, where the Willow Run factory produced one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. Tens of thousands of workers, over 1 million parts, precision assembly lines operating with calm efficiency. The prisoners had been told American aircraft were inferior. What they saw destroyed that lie forever. By the time they reached Texas, Nazi mythology was already dying. Camp Hearn astonished them with heated barracks, hot showers, flush toilets, and hospitals better equipped than many German civilian facilities. Penicillin was used freely, even on enemy soldiers. They were fed better as prisoners than they had been as soldiers. When labor shortages sent them into American farms and factories, the final collapse occurred. One farmer with machinery could outproduce entire villages. Electricity powered nearly every rural farm. Workers of every background operated complex machines with ease. Democracy, they had been told, was chaos. What they saw was productivity without fear. By Christmas 1943, American families sent hundreds of thousands of packages to German prisoners. Churches sang carols in German. Communities sent food, cards, and kindness to men who had once been enemies. This was not propaganda. It was confidence. When news of D-Day reached the camps, there was no denial left. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, an industrial system so vast it crushed any remaining fantasy of victory. The prisoners didn't just lose the war, they lost the lie that built it. They returned to Germany changed. They had arrived believing in conquest and racial superiority. They left believing in production, freedom, and human dignity. America's greatest victory was not only on the battlefield, but in the quiet destruction of an enemy ideology through overwhelming evidence. The German prisoners came as enemies, but they left as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at its absolute peak. And once you have seen that truth, it can never be unseen.